Akehurst-Ryan. I'm got 14 years of experience in testing, currently working as a test engineer. Love a mind map. I usually focused on the exploratory side of testing and previously have been a manual tester. So I definitely understand this question of do we all need to suddenly be an SDIT? And I'm also a kick-ass dungeon master as well. So yeah, let's, as you can see, I'm also locked inside like the rest of you. So yeah, let's jump into it with what is a software developer in test. So the main differences that we find between a software developer in test and a tester is that traditionally your software developer in test has been primarily a developer. Their focus has been on software development and coding. Their focus will be on automation. And as such, with that, they can very much engage in very technical discussions around things like architecture or coding and those types of things. They usually have an exposure to test, meaning they know how to test. They may not know the what's to test. And at the moment in the industry, definitely, they are seen as that unicorn. We're seeing job specs constantly saying software developer in test, software developer in test. The other side of the coin, your testers, focusing on championing quality within your team. They have a focus on identifying and mitigating development risks. They can bring critical thinking and heuristics to a team. They can bring in automation and exploratory testing, but according to the market, they can be seen as not as technical as your software developer in test. So that's sort of a general overview. Well, having to some companies out there, really, it's about that one-man band mentality. There's definitely where we've seen a huge shift towards agile, and we've seen a shift towards continuous delivery. It's seen that we're going to need more developers. We need developers because we need people to start talking about design, start talking about coding, get involved as early as possible, and start to shove our automation capabilities as early as possible. Perhaps writing unit tests and integration tests as well, but definitely getting involved in those early conversations. And another thought that comes out of that is this belief that testers are manual only. If you say testers, it always comes up with manual testers. So there's a concern that if you bring a tester into the team, especially a small team, and especially if you're shifting to agile, will they become a bottleneck? Will they be looking to test things at the end of a process? And some people are definitely in that automate everything kind of viewpoint. You want a software developer in test because you think automation, that's your test strategy, that we can just throw an automation framework over something. We'll have some unit tests that will meet us for our continuous delivery pipeline. That will ensure that that's the silver bullet that will solve all our problems. If we have automation, we won't have any issues. And we also get the view that it's the developer's job to test. That you just, because the developers should be writing unit tests, should be checking their work, that you don't need a tester. You just need more software developers, perhaps one that can knock a framework together, get us started down this route, as opposed to somebody who can come in and champion quality and testing altogether. So that's kind of the different views that we're seeing in the industry that's leading us to a lot of people wanting software developers. But what we're really looking for when we break this down is that we really just want a technical or a full stack tester. So somebody who's T-shaped, that can get involved in business side of things and also the technical side of things, but have that sort of like long part, that deep dive with a quality specialism, that they can set up a framework, that they can talk about quality. Framework that seems to be quite important, especially nowadays with agile environments. We want to be able to automate all of our regression testing, get involved in the CI/CD pipeline and all that. And we want to be able to shift our testing earlier So we can feed into technical discussions so that we can say, okay, we're talking about this kind of architecture. Here are the risks involved in that. But also, we're going to want someone who knows what to test as well. So this is that one-man band mentality, that they can come in, not just put the framework into place, but also knows what we can test as well. So if we're going to say that we need technical testers, what do I need to do to basically become a technical tester? And these are the things that I pulled out with talking about the different skills that we need. So one side of this is definitely talking about testing skills, to say that we need to be able to pick up risk analysis. We need to be able to know our testing heuristics, our ways of working, our ways of thinking around testing, where risks might lie, where issues might lie. We're going to need critical thinking so that we can think about what types of problems might come across, or how to subject different artifacts, different tickets and designs to different types of testing technique. We're probably going to need skills in exploratory testing so that we can understand what we're going to test, as well as how we're going to test it. We need to be able to communicate issues succinctly and fairly well. Champion quality, so coming into a new team, building that out, making sure everyone's on board with how we champion quality and how we're going to push that forwards. They're going to need to know a lot of different things, domain knowledge, business knowledge, become an SME in any given subject. And they're going to need to have a knowledge about human factors. So this is the good stuff around look and feel, accessibility, how to work with people, how it feels to use a product, putting the human back into our engineering, those types of things. But as well as that, we're going to need technical skills. And this is the side that normally we cover off with our software developers in tests. So architectural knowledge, how do we understand the different layers and services of our systems and how they interplay and what integrations are there? How do we set up an automation framework? If we're part of a new team, how do we get involved, advocate for a new automation framework to be used and get that into place? We're going to need different tools based on the testing we do. We're going to need a coding language, enough to be dangerous, I would say. If you can set up an automation framework, get your testing underway, and maybe start to have a read around pull requests with some help, that will help your object-oriented language, that is, I mean. And again, your technical test is going to be around, your technical skills are going to be around types of tests and how to review them. So that also means getting involved to say, how do I review unit test coverage? How do I review integration tests? How do I go all the way through to that end-to-end level as well? So we know what we want from our technical testing, but how do I get there? So this is a path that I've undergone myself, or that I'm working towards, to say, starting as a tester, how do I get more technical so I can be seen, if not as a software developer in test, but as someone that can bring a lot more to the table. So the top level of things that I've got here is stuff that pretty much you'll be doing just as part of exploratory testing or manual testing. So using test scripts, understanding those, even if you're running them manually, using things like SQL to understand how to pull data, get your syntax right. Things like, how do I start with exploratory testing? How do I start getting into the guts of my product, pulling it apart, looking at the different services and understanding that so I know what an architecture looks like? How do I start doing API testing? So can I pull out SOAP? Can I pull out Postman? Can I start making those calls and see what data is there, what a JSON array looks like, and so on? And then building on from that, I might start looking at the dev console. So not just the networking tab, which will tell me data. So like that API testing in real time from the front end through to the back end. It will also give me information around being able to inspect elements and start to look at the code and how the product is built up. And then I might decide, do you know what, I'm ready for some automation. I've been using Postman for my API testing. I can use the snippets there. I can do some Postman automation, and that's a good way to start moving along. From there, Maybe I'll start to do some light automation. I could start pairing with people. So I could do test-driven development to help my developers write unit tests by coming up with the test ideas on the fly. Or maybe I'll do BDD, so business driven development, to write Gherkin style tests, sort of in a human way, but Gherkin style tests are written in a human way with a framework underneath them that might be maintained by your development team. Building on from that, I might start to review unit tests, pairing with the developer saying, hey, talk to me through the coverage of your unit test. Show me, walk me through the code and the logic. Let's understand this. And how can I help come up with more test ideas, check that the coverage is looking good. Or again, working to debug issues. Sit with the developer, put breakpoints into the code, start looking to see how the data flows through things, find where those issues are, and start to understand more about your product. And from there, we can also start to learn object-oriented languages. We're starting to see the code. We're maybe looking at TDD. We're looking at unit tests, and maybe we're debugging issues. Things like Code Academy will allow us to start learning an object-oriented language, like JavaScript is quite a good one to be using. And that will give us a lot of knowledge about how these things are put together, what a variable is, what a class is, and that will allow us to then build our skill set. And with that, we can then start to use something like Selenium. We can start with our UI tests and good starting point, because we can use what we know already from test scripts, driving everything from the UI and our object-oriented languages to build that up. We might then decide to go headless and start looking at back-end tests. We could use Selenium or Cypress for that. So again, it's using those same skills that we sort of started building along just to get there and say, do you know what? Yeah, I can test these. I can start to put in automation tests. I know what I'm doing here. We can start to look at things like Docker and Docker Compose, and that will build into our Selenium frameworks, because it allows us then to start spinning up little local environments for things, cloud-based containers of environments that will say, right, now I can actually start feeding into a pipeline. I can spin up environments. I don't need one that's already built. I can build that. I can bring them up. I can bring them down, and I can set my tests against them as well. And finally, that then means that we can start plugging into CI/CD, so continuous improvement, continuous integration, continuous delivery tools. So things like Jenkins, things like our logging and our Kubernetes and things, to say, I've got all these tests, I can feed into the pipeline, but what tooling, what responses do I need from that? So that's like different paths to get through different levels of technicality there. So I guess if we were to ask the question, do we all need to become software developers in test? No, but what we do need to become is a technical or a full stack tester. We need to be able to hone our testing skills, focus on things like exploratory testing to understand the what we're going to test. We need to be a thought leader in the industry, and also a thought leader within our own companies. We need to be able to champion testing and say, this is how we're going to test. We need to know languages and automation frameworks in order to be able to be marketable these days. That may be not at a software development level, but it will be definitely an ability that we can be dangerous, that we can get involved in and start to set these things up. We need to be technical enough to be dangerous, as I've said. You need to be able to understand different things like the architecture of your system, or what an API looks like, or what a microservice looks like, so that you can understand these things and get involved in those conversations and talk about modern concepts, understand and learn what CI/CD looks like, or what containerization looks like, or what cloud development looks like, or simpler things, like progressive web apps. How do we understand those? How do we talk about those? And then finally, we need to be able to be agile and shift left. And that means championing testing, coming in early. How do we test acceptance criteria? How do we test designs of things? How do we start looking at the code and everything? So yeah, T-shaped testers, so technical testers will be T-shaped, like we said earlier. just because we're technical, that doesn't mean that we won't have a specialism. We can definitely be T-shaped. We can be a generalist in a lot of the skills that I talk about here, being technical, with a specialism. So maybe your specialism will be front end. You'll know a lot about human factors, UI automation, accessibility, design and marketing. Maybe you'll be back end. Maybe you'll be like brilliant at coding, microservices, unit testing, integration testing, all those things. But you should, although you have a specialism in one of those things, you should have a bit of knowledge, some breadth to understand and be able to contribute in these other areas as well. And as part of that, we'll also include these things on the right. So being able to use tools, maybe getting involved in security testing or penetration testing, being able to understand performance, pipelines, getting involved in writing test strategies, and also being able to explore systems and do your exploratory testing. So again, it's about having, a specific specialism, but having that understanding elsewhere. So not necessarily becoming a software developer in test for everything, but being able to be technical enough that you can get involved in all the things that the people asking for software developers in test really want. So that was sort of my stall, setting out this kind of like area for talking about, like, do we all need to become software developers in test? But I think, Ashley, you had a thing where we could ask questions and so on. I welcome any questions about this sort of area, or thoughts or comments. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, definitely. If everybody looks into the chat on Zoom here, you can see the link through to Slido, or you can go to slide.do and put QA1 in, and it'll bring up our little page there. Yeah, like Cam said, anyone that's got any questions on his talk, I guess any questions in general as well about anything within the testing side of things. You know, we've got a lot of time left now, so yeah, we can open it up. Any questions, any topics, feel free to put that in the questions there, and yeah, we'll run with it from there. So I've just put the link in there again because it doesn't look like there's any questions coming through yet. Anybody, any questions? Feel free to just open your mic or camera, ask over, ask on the call. Typical daily tasks.
Oh, as a technical tester, yeah, definitely. So if I jump back to some of this stuff. So yeah, as a technical tester, so as opposed to an Esther, what I tend to get involved in generally is all the things you would expect from testing. I get involved early in the software development lifecycle. I will talk to people about designs that they have or ideas and use exploratory testing to start asking them more information to get the details around what we're trying to build. So that might be helping to flesh out acceptance criteria to say, okay, you said you want error handling. How are we going to throw those errors? Or when are we going to throw those errors? Would it be a 400 response from the API or a 500 response? So there'll be a lot of conversations like that. I'll pick up through to tickets that have not yet been started working on, and I will explore them to come up with risks about potential solutions that come up. So if I know that we're going to have database implementations in there, we'll talk about things like, okay, well, we know that there's going to be create, read, update, and delete there. What happens if we run out of space? What happens if the network fails during this? And that will then start to allow people to think about those things before we even build it. I'll have reviews, test reviews, definitely, where I will pair with developers, start looking at handover of work that they're doing, talk to them about the work that they're doing, maybe do some TDD, so help them to come up with unit test ideas, work with them on that. And then subsequent to that, I might do some sessions on exploratory testing. I will subject it to all sorts of different types of tests based on the risks that I previously identified. And that will then allow me to debrief the developers as quickly as possible to say, okay, here are the issues that we found. What's related to that? Do we need to fix these things? And when we've got information from exploratory testing, and then we know what this tool should be doing, we can then add it into testing frameworks as well. So we've got some automation in Cypress that I've got to contribute to, some headless ones. And then when I've got time in between all those things, I'm getting involved in agile ceremonies. I'm talking about best practices for how we can introduce testability into everything that we're doing. I'm advocating for modern testing techniques, talking about how we can promote accessibility testing or performance testing in our product. I'm experimenting with different tools and techniques. I was using Charles Proxy today to try and force data into my UI. So yeah, loads of things. And then, yeah, on top of that, just keeping up to date with the product, reading through any documentation that's available, and creating documentation where it doesn't exist to show other people and bring them on board with our product as well. Hopefully that kind of gives an indication of the types of things that I do. There's a lot there.
Perfect. And yeah, moving on from that, what would you say are the key differences between an automation tester and a software developer in test? And how can you make them move from automation tester to a software developer in test?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good question. So one of the key things working with automation testers, as well as software developers in test, and against sort of other types of testers, is mainly to do with your focus and what lens you shine onto things. I've worked with software developers in test and automation specialists who, although they're brilliant at setting up a framework and they can pull out tests for like happy cases or for your negative testing, they might struggle or they start to lose those skills in exploratory testing because they haven't used them in a while. So the big difference that you tend to find is the types of testing that they can get involved with. So if you specialize too strongly in automation and you start to try and do an automate everything approach, you start to lose those critical analysis skills, or you don't flex your exploratory testing skills that will allow you to uncover the unknown in your testing. So you need to make sure that there's a balance there, that you can not just do the automation and write code and, you know, validate the happy path, but you can also explore the system, think about things, shift into saying, oh, what happens if this? And uncover those unknowns as well. That's one of the biggest differences that I see between them. And also just when people tend to get engaged as well. So again, your software development tests and your automation specialists may sit back from some of the team discussions when you're designing things, or may not get involved in the human factors side of design work. Whereas testers who are sort of definitely more star-shaped or T-shaped, or however you want to call them, can bring those to the table as well. So it's about having that strong exposure to automation, writing code, and the other side is that strong testing, knowing your heuristics, knowing those testing skills and exploration. And we need to be able to be in the middle so that we can achieve both. You need to be able to automate and explore. Hopefully that answered that question.
I think there's some coverage on some others there as well. Obviously, it looks like there's a lot of crossover with some of these. There's one here. Is there still a future of a tester?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I was part of a roundtable discussion the other day, and it is difficult. It's definitely difficult where we're seeing at the moment the market definitely shifting towards wanting one-man bands. And it's not just in testing. We see it from development as well, where people want like 72 years worth of experience in Java, for example. We're seeing because people want like these one-man band people that can be brilliant and do everything to join their teams, job specs are looking very overloaded with things. And like we said, although people might ask just for a software developer in test, it's for us to educate to say that actually what you want is a tester. And one of the largest things that we've seen from this is the idea that manual testers won't be needed anymore, or they're no longer, they're redundant from teams. But there are still companies out there who definitely are looking for testers, looking for people that can do that manual testing. Definitely look for people with exploratory skills. These job roles will usually talk about exploration, being able to sort of get involved in discussions with testing, be able to do critical analysis for things. It'd be interesting, Ashley, as a recruiter, what's your take on sort of this view of like, do people need testers or will everything, or is everything shifted just to software development?
I think where everyone seems to be taking that approach of shift left, and obviously putting more emphasis on quality further along the chain. So we're seeing a lot more demand for software developers in test. So it varies from company to company. I mean, I think we've had this conversation quite a lot recently, you and I. But I think a lot of people they look for they're looking for a bit more than someone that can just carry out all of the automation and general testing principles. They want someone that can be a bit more involved with the development teams. Can understand unit testing and wants to be involved with reviewing that with the developers, and yeah, certainly a drive towards having that. I guess having that better understanding of the sort of understanding the coding concepts or object oriented principles. That's sort of, I guess, the main sort of shift that we're seeing from our side. And general conversation I'm having with clients when they're saying that we want a developer in test, the general understanding is they're going to need to understand some sort of code, not necessarily be able to build a full feature out at production level, but just having that understanding of the layout and the sort of I guess the sort of general patterns and so on within programming. So yeah, I think that's where we're seeing the shift from automation to developer in test, and that main focus being that you need that sound understanding of the fundamentals of development, I guess, as well.
Yeah, to be frank, one of the dirty secrets involved in this is that usually these are sort of smaller companies. They don't want to hire multiple people. They just want to hire one person to throw at a project. And it's seen that a software developer can be an individual contributor and build something. And if you're building automation, you're contributing to your code base. It smacks of a lack of agile rigor or an understanding that testing can be done earlier in the pipeline at that exploratory level to look at design and so on, without necessarily needing to be a software developer. So when we see software developer in test, it usually just means I want someone that can land into an agile team and get involved in things. Now, that sometimes means, and because we talked about it here, there are people that are thinking that testers are just manual and that they're not going to be able to do any of these types of things, or they have a view that we're going to automate everything. All testing is automation. And again, that's an assumption that they'll quickly come to understand won't actually solve all their problems, or they won't find all their issues, because you're only able to automate what you already know, rather than being able to uncover information. Or they'll say, developers, job to test, we can just hire in more developers. We'll probably get them to do some coding on the side as well and develop things because we don't need testing. And again, they'll start to find out that in the future, there may be quality issues there. So I think, again, the pendulum's always swinging. We swing one way to say exploratory testing is super important. Everyone wants that. We swing the other way for smaller companies saying, oh, we just need automation. That's going to be the solution to everything. There's always going to be a need for testers, but it needs to be the type of tester that can get involved in a modern agile team. So having those understandings, being able to showcase some of that is useful.
Perfect. So just trying to filter through some of these questions now. Let's have a look. Okay. Do we learn these skills in a commercial environment, or do we learn them in our free time? Are there any open source projects to improve our skills?
Yeah. So yeah, if you've got a company that gives you that time to say, let's learn on the job, that's great. If you can pair with people, start upskilling, learning from them, that's really amazing. What I found is that sometimes you are going to have to take some of your own time to learn these things, because not every company is like going to give 20% of your time for learning and so on. What you can do is you can start to look at things like Code Academy. If you want to start learning about object-oriented languages, Code Academy is a great place to start. Googling around, if you look at the Ministry of Test, there's a lot of open source projects there in all different types of testing that you can get involved in. Which is really useful and really easy to get started with. I've used the Evil Testers introduction videos to Selenium to get started on those. And then a lot of it has just been playing around myself to get into it. And if worst comes to worst, you can start Stack Overflowing. There's a lot of people on Stack Overflow that will try and give you answers. And if you use Stack Overflow, you're basically being a developer anyway. And then if you get involved in the community, if you start going onto forums, especially in the Ministry of Test, there will be people falling over themselves to support you with the specific problems that you're having. And you can start to find mentors in testing quite easily in that way. There's definitely a lot of people out there who are like really happy to help.
Perfect. I think that answered quite a few different questions there around certifications and obviously upskilling and so on. Let's see. Just joined the team as an automation QA. Realized all of my testing is based on testing DevOps work. So getting to know Kubernetes, Docker, and so on. What would your advice be to? Well, it says what would be your advice? I guess what would be your advice to upskill quicker? I guess with those sort of toolings.
Yeah, without knowing the specifics around what tooling it is, that's a difficult one. What I would say, if you've got a DevOps team, start speaking to them about what you could get involved in and what testing is needed. Definitely start to think about from your pipeline where your testing needs to be, what levels of testing you want to introduce, what your unit testing looks like, what reporting you're going to have in place, what monitoring you're going to have in place, what environments you have in place. I don't have massive amounts of like specific knowledge and specific expertise in DevOps, but there is definitely stuff around that. Again, Ministry of Testing will be able to support you in that. But I would say start to understand your problem space and think about your levels of testing and what you need to introduce there and what tooling will help you best with that. And then talk to the DevOps engineers around how you can integrate that testing and levels, what levels of testing you're going to have in there, how you're going to use your test data to run things as well.
Okay, perfect. So there's a lot on there that are things I guess that you've covered off essentially about upskilling. Have a look through different things you mentioned, obviously Code Academy and so on. There's one here about obviously some interviews for SDITs or software developers in test require completing coding challenges, which are on the likes of HackerRank and so on, because they obviously want strong developers. How would you advise skilling up and being able to do such challenges? I guess you've touched on some of the stuff of on how to upskill from a coding perspective. Also, I mean, from my side, in terms of HackerRank and that, I know you can go on there and you can do sample tasks to get used to the platform and so on as well. So obviously practice as much with that. But Is there anything further that you would like to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, this again, testing interviews, and again, this smacks of your testing interviews should really be able to talk about whether you're able to test, more so than coding, because you need to know enough code to be dangerous. But if your company's asking you to basically be a software developer and to do those hacker ranking style challenges, they're really asking for you to be able to like actually code and get involved in software development over testing. So it's a pretty tricky one, because if you're coming at it from a testing perspective, the coding that you need to be able to achieve is much more around like, how do I review code? How do I subject it to critical analysis? How do I understand what these unit tests are showing me? How do I, implement an automation framework and add my tests there? There's much less around the actual coding principles that these coding challenges have in there. I've never actually gone through one, because if I see a company that's going to make me do a coding challenge, I say, well, I'm not a software developer, so I'm not able to go for that. So I don't know if anyone else has any sort of like advice on skilling up in those things, but I mean, I'd probably start talking to some software developers if I wanted to go down that route in there. So yeah, sorry, I'm not able to.
Yeah,
to
I think to add from my side, I know there's a lot of different ones. There's HackRank, there's Codility, and there's numerous different platforms that they use. Varies from company to company, depending on what they're actually looking for. Some they will want you to code to a certain level and be hitting 70-80%, which is going to be that of a developer, which is obviously it sets the, I guess, as Callum says, sets the tone of what they're actually looking for, or are they actually looking for a tester in any sense? But there are some that will ask to complete the task just to get a level of understanding of your development knowledge. There's no pass or fail, just to see approach with that as well. But yeah, I guess if anyone else has got any advice on that to upskill and get used to those sort of tasks, feel free to pitch in or share some details, and we'll get that shared around as well. Let me see. I think there might be a couple more. Is the Ministry of Testing free, like test automation, university? Callum?
Different parts of it are. There are free parts of it. There is definitely a subscription as well, where you can get sort of like more detail. So there's a lot of free materials out there on the Ministry of Test and their forums and so on. But there's also, there is some paid content in there as well, because they like to be able to pay the people that provide training such as this for people. So, but yeah, there's a lot of free stuff out there. And some of the people who write for Ministry of Test also like write a lot of blogs and write a lot of training materials and put them out there freely as well. So yeah, some free, some paid.
Okay, perfect. And I think we've got.
I see there's a good question here about recommendations for beginner manual testers in terms of small projects to get. And career change. What I would recommend, and I did talk about it here. Yeah, there we go. So if you're starting off as a manual tester, you're probably looking at test scripts, and you're probably starting off using SQL. You might be using exploratory testing as well. The next steps that I would take to move on to get more experience in things is I'd start to look at API testing. The Postman tool is brilliant for that. So start to, and it's also really well documented, and there's a great community around it. It's a tool that allows us to make API calls, send a header, send a body, and get responses to them. And from that, we can then start to use the snippets and the tooling already built into Postman to build tests around that, to say, if I send this request, I'll get this response within this amount of time, and it will include this. There's so much that you can do with it. And it's so easy to start using, and the documentation on their own website is brilliant to get started with that. So that would be my recommendation for if you're just starting out and you want to start building things, start understanding what APIs do, and start using Postman. Use it manually to start being able to make calls between your front end, your API layer, and your back end services, and then you can start automating those. Once you realize how easy that is, because if you can use a SQL script or an Excel formula, you can do quite a lot of this. You can start to build up your knowledge, and you can start to say, go to Code Academy, learn an object-oriented language like JavaScript, and build on that. Definitely don't try and throw yourself in and get overly scared. So if you start like 0 to 100 and go straight to Selenium, then you'll be like, oh, it's a new tool, and I've got to learn like how all of the layers of the system are, and what's a language, and all this kind of stuff. Take it a bit at a time. Start by understanding what the layers of the system are. Like, start to understand what an API is, what they provide you, what you get back from them. Look at the JSON that's involved in that. Start to look at that tooling, then start to learn an object-oriented language at a basic level, and then think about what other tools you can start to learn from an automation perspective.
Perfect. And I think just one more thing. It looks like Stan's just jumping back to the first question about your typical task, but how much time roughly do you spend writing automation tests per day or per week? What type of tests, what type of automated tests do you write mostly?
Yeah. So the approach that I've taken at the moment is predominantly an exploratory testing approach. So a lot of my time is spent there. When it comes to per day or per sprint, let's say, maybe I'll spend like a day in a sprint. So every 2 weeks, making sure that my automated test suite is up to date with any new features or any new endpoints. I'm actually running end-to-end tests, but they basically are integration tests for the back end. So it's an API layer through to the back end and responses. We're doing headless automated tests there. So probably about like a day, a sprint, making sure that those are up to date and that the framework's in place. At the beginning, when we were trying to get that in place in the first place, that was like much more, it like took a whole sprint to do it. But now, because of the cadence of work that's coming in, we're able to say, here are the things that we want to be able to automate. We understand that we're not going to automate everything, because that's what we've got exploratory testing for. And our automation practices need to ensure that we've got longevity, so that we don't overload our CI/CD pipeline with too many tests in the future. So pretty about, yeah, a day sprint, making sure those are kept up to date.
Perfect. Yeah, it looks like that's cleared all of the questions through there, Callum. So thank you very much again for putting this talk together for us tonight, and for your insight and question answering there as well. Thanks everybody else that's joined us this evening. Any further questions, obviously feel free to drop me an email or a message and let me know. And yeah, hopefully I'll reach out to everybody with the recording probably tomorrow, and I guess that yeah, I'll send you all details of our next events. Any questions, any topics that you'd like to hear about, any if anyone wants to talk at a future event, obviously let me know, and we can set something up. But no, thanks again, Callum, and see you all soon.
Thanks everyone. Bye bye.